everyone, Thor here out at La Plata, one of Colorado's 14ers. It's actually the 5th highest in the state, and we have a bunch of stuff to go over today. Everything from bratwurst and brothels.
So what is this brothel you're telling us about? Bratwurst or brothel?
Bratwurst.
The fuck?
Ra's going to go ahead and show you the trailhead conditions because this is not one if you have a two-wheel drive car. And we're also going to go over the trail conditions, but also the 25 bodies that are buried near this mountain and what exactly happened to this ghost town. But without further ado, let's start hitting this trail.
The road leading toward La Plata South Route isn't exactly known for being friendly to vehicles. It starts off rough enough, but the further you drive, the narrower and rockier it becomes. In some places, there's barely enough room for two vehicles to pass each other, and every bend in the road feels like you're heading further away from civilization. But that's part of what makes this area so special. As the road gets rougher, the scenery gets better. Streams rush alongside the road, snowmelt pours down from the mountains, small rivers weave through the valley, and towering peaks dominate every direction you look. Eventually, we arrived at one of the most fascinating places in Colorado's high country, the ghost town of Winfield. Today, it's mostly silent. A handful of historic buildings remain standing, surrounded by mountains that seem almost unchanged from when miners first arrived here over 140 years ago. But in the late 1800s, this was a booming silver mining community filled with families, businesses, schools, and hundreds of residents hoping to strike it rich in the Colorado Rockies. As we continued past the town, we reached the historic Winfield Cemetery. Looking at it today, it's surprisingly small, yet around 25 members of the community are buried here. Some died from disease, some died from accidents, and some met ends so bizarre they almost sound fictional, and we'll get into those stories as we make our way up the mountain, because the history of Winfield is deeply connected to the same rugged landscape we're about to climb through. Eventually, we reached the trailhead, and La Plata wasted absolutely no time reminding us why this route has a reputation. The South Ridge gains roughly over 3,000 feet of elevation and just about 3.5 miles up, which means one thing: you're basically climbing straight uphill for the most of the day. There are very few opportunities to recover and catch your breath. The only flat section is a marsh, and there's very few breaks unless you want to take them. It's just an endless grind towards the summit, and the trail immediately begins climbing through the forest alongside a rushing stream. Even as we are going into the summer months, patches of snow and ice still linger in the shaded areas around the water. Fortunately, conditions were good enough that spikes and trekking poles weren't really necessary. Looking at the remaining snow, though, it's easy to understand one of the tragedies connected to Winfield. Back in 1900, an avalanche struck the John Payne family's cabin. Their 9-year-old son was buried beneath the snow and suffocated before rescuers could reach him. Standing here looking at the steep slopes surrounding the valley, it becomes clear that winter in these mountains wasn't something people simply endured, it was something they survived, or sometimes didn't. As we continued upward, the trail kept doing exactly what it had been doing since the start: going up, and then going up some more. The higher we climbed, the thinner the forest became, and eventually the trees began disappearing altogether, and the views exploded open around us. Breaking above the tree line on this route is really incredible. The trail enters a broad marsh valley surrounded by towering mountains on nearly every side. 3 peaks rise directly ahead. Behind us, ridge after ridge stretches towards the horizon. It's one of those places where you constantly find yourself stopping to take photos, or pretending to take photos because your lungs need a break. No judgment, but you've all been there. At over 12,000 feet, everyone suddenly becomes very interested in landscape photography. Looking across this valley, it's hard to imagine hundreds of people once trying to build lives in such a remote place. But Winfield wasn't just a collection of cabins, it was a thriving mining town, and mining came with serious risks. One of the cemetery's most tragic stories belongs to a young miner named William Wallace, not the one from Scotland, just putting that out there. While preparing explosives, he attempted to thaw dynamite on top of a forge. If that sounds like a terrible idea today, that's because it was. The dynamite exploded, killing him instantly. Frontier life doesn't and didn't offer many second chances. Eventually, our history lesson was interrupted by the mountain reminding us that the hardest part was still ahead, because standing in front of us was the first major obstacle, a brutally steep climb straight up the side of the mountain. The trail suddenly transitions from difficult to downright rude. Every step gains elevation, and every turn reveals more climbing. After a while, the mountain starts negotiating directly with your legs, but at least the scenery remains incredible. As exhausting as the climb was, the views behind us keep getting better with every foot gained. Eventually, we reach the top of that steep section, only to discover our reward: a rocky scramble and our first false summit. If you've never experienced the false summit before, here's how it works. You see what looks like the summit, you celebrate, you climb to it, and then the mountain reveals another summit behind it. It's basically psychological warfare disguised as geology. Meanwhile, my dog Ragnar was having the time of his life. He has his camera rolling. He absolutely flew up the scramble, reminding us that dogs in four-wheel drive drive are just unfair. At this point, I'm fairly convinced dogs are just naturally better at mountaineering than humans. And eventually, we reached the top of the false summit. The good news, we could finally see La Plata's summit. The bad news, there was still another false summit standing between us and it. Looking out across the exposed ridges reminded me of another resident buried down in Winfield Cemetery. George Wright survived the harsh winters, dangerous mining work, and everything else frontier life could throw at him, only to be killed by a lightning strike, which every mountaineer should know about when they go and climb a 14er. Because standing high above treeline with nothing but open sky around us, it's easy to understand why Colorado's mountains demand respect when storms begin rolling in. The ridge itself was absolutely spectacular. Jagged peaks stretched in every direction. The Sawatch Range unfolded across the horizon. Snow is still lingering in several sections despite the summer conditions, and in some places stepping off the main path meant instantly post-holing into hidden snow. As beautiful as the ridge was, it also highlighted just how isolated life in Winfield must have been. One of the town's early residents, Tom Logan, met a tragic end when he became trapped inside his own cabin during a fire. Today, emergency services can often arrive within minutes. Back then, help could be hours away or not arrive at all. And the final push towards the summit felt endless. Every rise looked like it might finally be the last one, and every time another appeared. But eventually, we reached the final false summit, and this time something felt different because just ahead stood the actual summit of La Plata Peak, one final walk and climb, and suddenly there was nowhere left to go. At 14,336 feet, La Plata stands among Colorado's most iconic 14ers, and the summit view explains exactly why it's the 5th biggest mountain in Colorado. We finally made our way down, and on our way out, we spent more time exploring Winfield itself. The old cabins still stand. The schoolhouse remains one of the most recognizable buildings in town. Walking through the area feels like stepping into a time capsule. It's easy to imagine children attending classes here, families gathering after long days of work, miners returning from the surrounding mountains. At its peak, Winfield was home to hundreds of people. Then silver prices collapsed, jobs disappeared, and families moved away. Today, only the buildings remain to tell the story and those willing to go ahead and share it. That's going to be my video today. I hope you guys enjoyed it. And until next time, keep hitting the trails, and I'll see you in the next one.